Welcome to the Explore the Bible Teacher's Overview of Job 1 for Sunday, June 6, 2021. As we come into the book of Job, there's a lot of questions, and I think a good way to begin your lesson as a teacher this week might be to ask the question, especially if you have a class that is good about doing discussion. What is the most difficult thing that you've ever been through? I mean, everybody's got something that they could share. And then you could ask, how did you maintain your faith during that time? How did you do at that? If there's some honest sharing, there will be some good discussion there. Those of you who are members at First Baptist Angleton know my testimony that in 2012, as I was serving as a pastor, I got sick with an illness that I couldn't even stand for 10 seconds without becoming dizzy and getting dry heaves. Ended up having to resign the church for some time. It was a very, very difficult time. And to me, I felt like I was living out much of this book of Job. It's one of the reasons why this book is very special to me. But I remember at one point, I was lying in bed. I couldn't watch anything, couldn't listen to anything because it gave me a migraine headache to do it. It was just horrible. And I was laying there, and my wife Cheryl came into the room, and I said to Cheryl, I said, Cheryl, I said, I really have a peace about this. Well, Cheryl shared at a women's conference a couple of years later, after we'd come out of that, and God had blessed and raised me back up, and I gotten well. And the thing is, I was laying in bed, being at peace. She was having to pack up the house, everything in it, to sell it, going through all this stuff. She said, when I said, I'm just really at peace with this, she said, I just wanted to take that pillow and suffocate the snot out of you. So she's honest, and Robert or Chris, she may share that story in y'all's class if y'all are doing that this Sunday. But some honest sharing, difficult time, how you went through it. Some of us say, well, I really did well through it. Some of us say, I didn't do so well. And then we can also talk about, have you ever known someone who was in a difficult time? Or have you known someone who had a difficult time and did deserve it? I have a pastor friend who had a person in his sphere of influence who was injured in a drunk driving wreck. It was totally his fault. And he went to see him in the hospital, and this man asked the pastor, Joe, why did God do this? And to his credit, the pastor said, God didn't do this, my friend. He said, you did this all by yourself. The point being, there are ills that we bring upon ourselves in this world. And some of us might share some of that, the things that people did bring upon themselves. But we've also all known someone who had trouble and did not deserve it. And we all have known somebody like that. And that's the point here in this book of Job. Job did not deserve, quote unquote, the evil that came upon him because of his unrighteousness. In fact, and I love this point, if anything, the opposite is true. Job had what happened to him happen because he was so righteous. If you look at chapter 1, verse 8, God says to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? And he pointed out Job to Satan precisely because he was a righteous man, not because he was evil. So you can easily make the point, Job didn't suffer for his unrighteousness, he suffered for his righteousness. So there's just a whole lot there. So to get into the text then, you can do some of those things for an opening if you want to, or come up with your own. But then get into the text. In chapter 1, verses 1 through 5, we primarily learn about Job himself. And these verses really serve, and you can read them, they serve to show the uprightness of Job. He was blameless, he was upright, etc. I would emphasize this does not mean he was totally free from sin or anything like that. The Bible says, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. I think what this does is it serves to emphasize that what happens to him later was not because of his sin. And it runs counter to the common theological viewpoint that bad things happen when you do something bad, good things happen when you do something good. People have believed that from ages past. And, kind of what makes it difficult is there is a lot of truth in that. I mean, read the book of Proverbs. Live a righteous life, God will bless you. Live wickedly, you'll pay the price. And you see things like that over and over in Proverbs. But the catch is, and where we've got to be real careful, and what this book of Job helps us to understand, is it is not always that way. Sometimes bad people seem to be blessed. Look at Psalm 73. Asaph, I call this the Psalm of the man who almost lost his faith. He saw wicked people prospering. He said, I almost said, well, what's the use in living righteously? He said, until God showed me their end. But the point being, sometimes evil people seem to prosper. Job here shows us that even relatively good people can still suffer. And so, as a result of the full testimony of Scripture, especially in places like Job and like John 9, where the disciples asked Jesus, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus said, neither, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. As a result of scriptures like these, we should no longer hold to that old-fashioned viewpoint that if a person suffers, it is a direct consequence of their sin. But so all that to say, that's the point, I believe, of the Bible calling Job blameless, etc., in verses 1 through 5. It sets up this whole point the book is trying to make, that all suffering is not directly caused by the person's sin. So we learn about Job in this first section. He was a righteous man, and he did not deserve what happened to him, just as like a lot of people we know don't deserve what happened to them either. Now, another of the interesting highlights in Job, starting in verse 6 then, that next section, is that we learn a lot about the devil. And I think one thing you could do with your class is just set these verses before them. Okay, let's look at verses 6 and following. What all do we learn about the devil in this passage? You can just write them up on your dry erase board or whatever. Read it and then just talk about each one. We learn that he roams about the earth. Just like 1 Peter says, like a roaring lion roaming about, seeing whom he may devour. He is here in this earth. He is roaming around. We see that he is an accuser. He accused Job to God. Does Job fear God for nothing? And he accuses him of serving God for a gain and protection only. The Bible calls Satan the accuser of the brethren in Revelation 12:10. He is an accuser. One of the old Puritans said that the devil slanders God to men, men to God, like Job here, and men to other men. That's a whole message right there, just of Satan as a slanderer. Notice also something we learn about Satan is, as you read a little farther in verses 13 and following, Satan uses people and things on earth. Verse 13, he used the Sabaean raiders. It says he used the lightning, the fire from heaven. He used the Chaldeans. He used a great wind. So the devil uses people and things to accomplish his work. It's not just an unseen demonic hand. He uses events. He uses circumstances and people. That's something important for us to realize. And something very important for us to realize that we see in this passage is that he is subject to God. He appears before God as the king here, as a subject to the king. And he can only do what God allows him to do. And we see that in a couple of places here. Verse 10, he accuses Job to God, says, have you not made a hedge about him? So God had protected him. Satan could not get through it. God had put a hedge of protection there. Satan could not do anything God did not allow him to do. And then in verse 12, God gives Satan permission to afflict him. But God is in charge. Satan can only do what God allows. This is an important point theologically. Satan and God are not equals struggling for the control of the universe. God is on the throne. Satan cannot exceed what God allows. And we know from elsewhere that God causes even all of Satan's evil work to work for God's good purposes. When I got sick in 2012, Psalm 3:3 became an important verse in my life. That God is my shield, my glory, and the lifter of my head. And that part about my shield, God showed me, that means that he protects me. He is my shield. But if something comes through and gets me, that means that God has allowed that through his shield. It had to come through his shield first. He's allowed it for some purpose in my life. And I can look back and see so many good things that came out of that. If you want to, I did a three sermon series on my shield, my glory, the lifter of my head. It talks a lot about my illness in those three messages on my blog at www.shawnethomas.com, and look up Psalm 3:3, and you can find that if you'd like to. But that perspective Faith in God, even in the midst of trials, is a real key to this book, and probably the third major thing I would look at. The person of Job there, and what we learn about Satan, and now the third thing, the faith in God, even in the midst of trials. How did Job respond? And verses 20 to 22 are just classic. Number one, and I think this is important, he tore his robe and shaved his head. These are signs of mourning. Job was not stoic. He didn't just slough it off and say, oh, it's not anything. It really hurt him. It really hurt him, and he really mourned. It was a real hurt, a real pain. The Bible does not lessen the hurt and the pain here. He really mourned what happened. But in that hurt, he kept his faith. He says, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. The word Lord there, you see it's all caps. It means Yahweh, the personal name of God. He had a covenant relationship with God. He knew him and loved him and was loved by him, and he kept his faith in him. And so Job really models for us the way that we should respond. We can respond with real hurt and real pain in these times. We don't have to act like it doesn't exist, but never lose your faith in God in that time. There's a lot of theological points we can remember when we suffer. Just one basic one is that we're all sinners. And we can't complain about whatever happens to us. My wife Cheryl found a verse in Lamentations 3:39 recently that's really spoken to her. It says, why should any living mortal or any man offer complaint in view of his sins? Good point. I mean, how can we complain? We're all sinners. How can we complain whatever happens to us? But secondly, a second point is that God is sovereign and he is in charge, just like he was in Job. He has purposes for things. If it comes through his shield, then there is good to come out of it. Watch for the good. Watch for those opportunities to minister and witness. Cheryl and I have a former church member and friend in North Carolina whose son was severely injured recently when a tree swing broke and the branch fell on him. And they've been in the hospital now for months, but she has witnessed to so many doctors and nurses and other people through this. It has been amazing. Look for the good that God is using your trial for, or that he can use it for if you will let him. And then remember that his ultimate purpose is to make us like Christ. We need to remember that and purposefully focus on that. Pray it every day as we go through this. Lord, make me like you through this time. And then finally, that God just wants us to trust him more than anything else. Faith is what the Christian life is all about. He just wants us to trust him. He wants us to have faith. And I think one thing to remember about this book, Job never did know this whole story. We'll get to the end and then you'll see how God responded to him, many of you know it. But God just wanted him to trust him because of who he was. And he wants the same thing from us. Whatever we're going through, the number one thing, he just wants us to trust him. As I mentioned in the opening, I've been through some difficult times myself, and much of this book has become very real to me. And it may be to you too, and to many of your class members. This isn't just some dry, abstract theology, and do not let it be that. Make sure that you make it real and personal. And as such, there may be somebody in your class today, or maybe you yourself, who are in a difficult situation, and you just need to respond like Job and say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Just trust him with that situation that you're in. And maybe a good way for you to end your class would be in a time of prayer, just saying, Lord, help us to trust you in our situations. Maybe you can just pray for everyone, or maybe different ones will pray about their own situations, but ending with a prayer to trust God no matter what in those situations would be, I think, a great way to apply and close this lesson. And just a couple of extra things real quick you might want to consider in this study of Job. If you want to do some extra reading, let me just put you on to C.S. Lewis's book, The Problem of Pain. He talks about different kinds of suffering in the world and why it's actually necessary in a world where there is free will. There's going to be free will. We have to be able to make right and wrong choices, and it's going to have impacts on ourselves and other people. The only alternative is a robotic type universe where God controls everything and there's no meaningful choice. So Be some good extra credit reading that you might benefit from. Get that book, order it. It'll help you throughout this study of the book of Job over the next 7 weeks, and it'll just benefit your life as a whole regardless. The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis. Another interesting thing to do, just this is just an optional thing, but as you go through the book, watch for the questions of Job. Job asks all kinds of interesting, searching questions as we go through this book. And one thing you might do as a class, just a optional thing, is just keep track of them. Keep track of the questions of Job. Just leave it up there on your dry erase board. The different classes, the different questions that Job asks. Or have a class secretary write them down each week and just keep track of all the questions of Job. For example, chapter 2, verse 10. Shall we indeed accept good from God and not adversity? Or chapter 3, verse 11. Why did I not die at birth? Or Eliphaz in chapter 4, verse 7. Can mankind be just before God? Or chapter 7, verse 20, have I sinned? What have I done to you, O watcher of men? Or chapter 14, verse 14 in the lesson for next week, if a man dies, will he live again? Some great questions. I thought it'd make a great sermon series maybe one day, the questions of Job. But just something extra if you want to do that. And you may want to record your own questions and your own class's questions as you go through this too. It's a very deep study, very good study. There's so much you can do with it. I hope this little overview will just help you some. Know that I'll be praying for all of our teachers and all of our classes this week. Let me just say thank you for all the kind comments that you've been putting on Facebook. I'm grateful that God is using this overview in a number of churches. Please feel free to share it with any other teachers who might benefit from it too. We'll see you next week, Lord willing.